Michael, Lindsay, Hogg. How are you today, Michael?
Well, Plastic EP, I'm fine here in Hudson, New York. Do you get up very early by nature?
I've been up all night waiting for this interview. And let me tell you, courtesy of Chachi he only had two of these original 1969 books, and he gave me one and sent it to me here in Australia. And because we love you that much, we wanted to show it to you. Is this great or what?
Yeah, it's great. It was put together quite quickly at the time, so it could come out with the movie in 1970. But because it was put out quickly, there's a lot of chat between the four of them and me and some other people, and some of the who said what got misattributed, so that sometimes I'm saying what Ringo said or he's saying what I said. But when I'm saying what he said, I got lucky because he's a very funny guy. But now there's a new book coming out about Peter's Get Back, and Airmail, which is an online magazine, has asked me to review it. It won't be out for a while, near when Peter's movies are coming out. The original book was good, sort of a slim, couple of pieces by David Dalton and Jonathan Cott, good photos by my friend Ethan Russell. The new book, by comparison, is wonderful. More attention to detail. Peter Jackson has a piece about how we first got to know about the Beatles. Hanif Kureishi has a piece about what the Beatles mean. The attributions are good about who says what. And there's a whole bunch of new pictures by Linda Eastman McCartney. And they're great. And so the book is a solid reference book. It's wonderfully produced. And I don't get any piece of it. So I'm not saying this for financial reasons. I'm just saying it's a good book. Get Back. I think it's coming out nearer the time when Peter's 3 films are coming out, which is going to be November in America, I think. So I would think this might be out in October, but I know Apple would know what the deal there is. Chachi, why are you called Chachi?
It's a radio name that was given to me back in 1982 in Boston, Massachusetts on WBCN. And it stuck. Okay. My real name is Lawrence Anthony Lopret, a nice Italian boy.
Chachi is easier to say.
Yes, and more memorable. Ringo and I have spoken many times. He always remembers my name. But Michael, it is such an honor to speak to you. And I would say to you this, my friend, if you need one of these, I will send you mine because I'm such an admirer of you, my friend. And that's the truth. I will send this to you if you want it.
I will try to get it from another source, but that is
about... Michael, here's your other source, because I guarantee I will send you mine. And I got no problem sending you mine. So there's your second source.
It is more important for you guys to have these mementos than for me. I will dig them up somewhere, but thank you. It is the best offer I've had today since my wife said, would you like scrambled eggs?
I'm a great admirer of you. For people who don't know, is a writer, author, director, actor. He has led such a memorable life. I am in the middle of reading your book, Luck and Circumstance. My friend, the life you are leading is unbelievable. And you've met some of the biggest movie stars, Orson Welles, Henry Miller, Humphrey Bogart, William Randolph Hearst. And you say in your book that rock and roll changed your life. How so? With all that going on in your life?
Oh, yeah. I was a really... my party grew up in California with my mother, Geraldine Fitzgerald, who's a movie actress under contract to Warner Brothers at the time. She was nominated for an Oscar for her first movie, Wuthering Heights. And that's how, when I was a little boy, I met some of the people that you mentioned, who, like most people, they were nice to kids. Humphrey Bogart was very nice. Olivia de Havilland was very nice. Then my mother and father split up when I was quite young. My mother remarried. We went to New York. My stepfather was a very nice guy, very, very nice, very decent. But I didn't like being in New York. I wanted to be back in California. So I started to get fat, you know, like the kind of guy that couldn't run away from bullies. Plus which, because of some kind of miswiring in my brain, I couldn't read till I was 8 or 9 years old. So I can't be a baseball player because I can't run because I'm fat. I can't read. And so a lot of people thought I was stupid, which in those days, they gave you a little less rope than they do these days if you're kind of weird as a kid. And so then I was sent away to a boarding school, and that was not any easier. And then most of the kids played jazz, trad jazz, you know, not Sidney Bechet jazz, but like there was a guy in England years ago called Acker Bilk who used to play with a little bowler hat and traditional jazz and stuff. And it wasn't for me. And some of the guys played Broadway show tune albums. This is on the little record players we had in school. Anyway, I'm 15 one day, and a guy who's a friend of mine called Carter, his first name, he says, listen, have you ever heard, I'm in his room, we're having a chat, and he said, someone sent me this, and he brought out a little sleeve, like a EP 45 sleeve, and he pulled out the little record from inside. He said, have you ever heard of this guy, Elvis Presley? And I said, no, who's that? And he said, well, someone sent it to me, and they said it was good. And so he puts it on through the little spike or the little round thing that goes over the spike on his record player. He starts to play Heartbreak Hotel, and my life turned around. And I thought, finally, there's music that I understand. Like mathematicians understand formula, I understood Elvis Presley. And so I suddenly thought, wow. So then over the years, whenever I listen to the radio or get some records, it would always be early rock and roll, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis, whoever. And I always liked it. I always liked rock and roll. And so then when I was about 24, I was lucky. A lot of things fell into place at the right time. I was working for an English television company. I was about to probably be let go because I wasn't doing very well. And they found out I'd lied to get my job, that I said I directed more than I had. I only directed one thing. And then the producer of this show, this rock and roll show, this live television rock and roll show called Ready, Steady, Go, whenever he came out of his office, he'd fall over me. I mean, no matter what, I'd be, picking up a piece of paper on the floor and he'd have to trip over me. So he said, listen, the director who's normally doing the show is going to take a 2-week vacation. Do you want to take over Ready, Steady, Go for 2 weeks? Wow. And I said, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. And so then I did my 2 weeks. Roy Orbison was on, Dusty Springfield was on, Dave Clark 5 was on. And on the board in the office, there used to be each week the guests who are going to come on the next week. And week 3, the week when I was supposed to be off the show, it said the Rolling Stones and the Animals, who were my 2 favorite bands. So I went to the producer and I said, with all the confidence you have when you're 24, if you let me do one more show, I'll give you the best rock and roll show you've ever had. And he kind of liked that, since the people who were normally doing the show were in their 40s and sort of thought they were slumming doing rock and roll, whereas I thought, this is, I've arrived in heaven. So I did the show. I think I did Shut the Animals better than the Stones because I didn't really get them for a while. I mean, I did, but they never was doing what I wanted them to do. And so then I got the show as a permanent job. And so rock and roll changed my life because I was the same age as they were, pretty much. I'm 3 years older than Mick Jagger, a little older than Lou Goldham, their manager, the same age as John Lennon would have been, the same age as Ringo. So we all were in the same age group, which was important. And also we all had grown up with that music, and that's why it changed my life.
Wow. Plastic.
Now, Michael, what a fascinating rock and roll start. And doing the clips for the Beatles, such as Paperback Writer, Rain, Revolution, and the big one, Hey Jude, which is their biggest song. I mean, it's unbelievable. My question is this. Is there a Beatles song that you taped and you've got it that has not been released? And I'm talking before Let It Be or after Let It Be. They may have asked you to do something for Abbey Road, for example, or the Beatles as solo artists may have asked you to film a song. Is that true?
No, but Peter Brown called me in whatever the year was, early 67. I think it was after Brian had died. And he was running Apple, and he said, the boys, as he called them, the boys would like to talk to you. They got a new album coming out. And he said, let's make it next Wednesday at 4:00. You come over here to Apple. And so then I don't know what it is, but then on Tuesday, he calls me the next day before and says, hey, I think we just ought to put off that meeting for a while. And what had happened was that Paul had met another director in a nightclub, and the other director had, because Paul's very interested in moving things forward and technical things. And the other guy said, well, let's shoot this video in infrared light. And then they did it, and it didn't work out very well. But by then they didn't do the video. And the sad thing was the video was going to be for A Day in the Life. So I didn't do that. Things don't always work out the way you want. The one I always wanted to do, but I didn't get, was Penny Lane. Because Penny Lane struck me as such a song about nostalgia, about your youth, and about always wishing to go back to it and not being able to. Because as you remember, it ends, they're telling a story about the fireman rushes in with boring rain, so it's very strange. Penny Lane is, and then they start to go into another bit of a story about the fireman, but they can't, because then they just can't get away from Penny Lane. And so Penny Lane comes in again, Penny Lane is in. And because it's the repetition of Penny Lane, which I thought, this is really them remembering their youths, which were so different from the enormous success they had as in their 20s. When they were teenagers, they were just like regular teenagers, hoping to get a kiss from a girlfriend or make a little money to buy a soda, go to the movies. And that was what their memory was about. Fish and finger pie is one, of course, we all remember.
Well, I agree with you. I love Penny Lane. I still can listen to it a million times because it reminds us of our youth. But one thing we talked about in part one of our conversation, we talked about memorable moments in Let It Be, the line at the end, I hope we pass the audition. But there was another exchange. And I wonder, as a filmmaker, in this case, a documentarian, that you sit there and it clicks when you are filming the exchange between Paul and George Harrison. Paul telling George how to play. George is like, well, listen, if you want me to play, I'll play. If you don't want me to play, I won't play. When moments like that had happened during Let It Be, do those things click in your mind to say, I got to remember that because that should be in the final version of the film?
Well, that's become a very noted exchange over the years. And a lot of people took at it as, like a line in the sand between the two of them. It wasn't really like that, but it was a moment of two musicians, two artists not agreeing, and there being a certain amount of tension, which I thought would be an interesting thing to show in the movie. And to such a degree that I could tell it was brewing. And usually the cameras were on the floor, just around shooting there and there. But because I wanted them not to feel the cameras were imposing on them and they were free to talk in whatever way they wanted to, you'll notice if you look at that sequence again, that I got the camera up in the grid to shoot down on Paul so that he had no sense of any camera infringement. And the shot between over Paul's shoulder looking at George, it's quite fuzzy, soft focus, because I got the camera all the way back to the dock walls. And so he's on a very long lens, which makes it a little bit fuzzy. So both of them feel uninhibited or not aware of the cameras. And so they can talk like they probably talked when they were 16 or 17. No, I don't want to do it like that. Well, that's all right. But I mean, because it was one of the most noticeable example of them having this discussion. It's only a point of view about music, as Paul says. It's like, you know, are we going to play guitars all the way through Hey Jude? It's going to be, we're going to do it this way or that way. Um, Perhaps they weren't getting on as well as they got on in high school when they were there together. Perhaps their lives were changing. All those things are perhaps, but it was just two guys having a disagreement, an opinion difference about something to do with their music. But BUT, because the movie was released after the Beatles broke up, it was used as a signifier that during the time we were making Let It Be, they were going to break up. Now, that wasn't in anyone's mind at the time. All I was trying to do was show the Beatles rehearsing, because as we discussed maybe the other time, was it going to be a television special, and then we ended up with just this documentary footage. So my job was to show the Beatles rehearsing, which no one had ever done before. They'd never let anyone in there. And if sometimes their rehearsals were a little bit lackadaisical, if there was any moment of contention, or if they were bored, or if they were thrilled, or if they really were grooving and everything was great, that's what I wanted to show. And they weren't breaking up when we were doing it, as in fact, you know, they went on to make another album. Were they the way they'd been when they were doing album number 1 and number 2? No, their lives had changed so enormously. But the point, Chachi, you're asking about is I knew something was brewing between these two guys. I wanted them to feel not surrounded by cameras and crew, moved it all away. This is the exchange which happened. Yes, I thought that's something which needs to go in the movie, but I didn't see it as it came to be seen. I saw it as just, you know, like two people having a disagreement. That's what that was.
I'm going to ask you, after Let It Be and the movie plays and the Beatles have broken up, did you cross paths with the Beatles again, either by themselves or individually? They kept in contact with you?
Yeah, before it came out, and you know, as things were starting to unravel a bit, George had called me up and asked, could I arrange a screening on a Sunday night in Soho? He wanted to bring a friend, but this was after the movie was cut and was ready to go, although it didn't go out for a while for various business reasons. So I arranged that, and then he comes in with Bob Dylan, and they watch it together, and then Bob Dylan walks out and gives me a little wave and a smile. And then I talked to George a couple of days later, and he said, Bob really liked it, but he sounded very relieved. Bob really liked it. He sounded very relieved. And then after the movie had come out, after um, they'd broken up, I did some videos for Wings, including Molufkin Tire. I love the bagpipes. And then I had an idea. This is before MTV and before a lot of the great songs were committed to video or film, is to do a movie where where all the rock and rollers were older now, but they somehow would go back to their youth and do the great song again. So you'd have Satisfaction from the Stones, so you'd have Instant Karma from John, whatever. So John and Yoko and I had some meetings in New York in a Japanese tea shop on West 56th Street about this project, which was going to be it was sort of on the backs of Mick Jagger and John Lennon, and would they do it? Yes, they would. For a variety of reasons, rock and roll projects are not always easy to set up. It didn't go. David Bowie was going to be in it. And then John didn't want to do it that year, which was 77 or 8, because I think Yoko threw the I Ching and it said it wasn't a good time for him to do it, whatever. Then I came back to England and then started to have success again, directing British television, Tom Stoppard play, etc., stuff like that. But to answer your actual question, yeah, I did. I had a good relationship with Paul and with Linda. I liked her very much. They asked me when their third child, James, was born, to come to the hospital and see what a cute baby he was. We had tea together in the hospital room. McIntyre, talking to John about the project. I would run into, I didn't see George much, run into Ringo sometimes in California, when after Maureen and he split up and he remarried, he spent, well, he lived in Monaco too, but he's been in California a lot. His memories of Let It Be are not so positive, but I don't think he's seen it for quite a while. And I think he might have been reading about how they weren't getting on with each other. But in fact, and for those of us who've seen Let It Be fairly recently, they get on very well. And I'm sure you're going to see that in Peter's movie, because they got on. The thing to remember is they were like brothers, and the brothers can fight sometimes. I was reading a piece about two friends of mine, the McNally brothers, who owned all the restaurants in New York, but they had a big row, like when they were in their early 30s, and one of them punched the other one and broke his cheekbone. Nothing like that happened with the Beatles, but there can be sibling disagreements. It wasn't nearly like that with the four of them, but they changed, and that's what has occurred. The answer, yes, is the answer, if you remember the question.
Well, Michael, you mentioned the Stones, and through my years of knowing your work and watching your interviews, especially when your book came out, we all, for years, we've talked about the differences between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And you have said in the past that, the Beatles are a quote unquote different dish, much different than the Stones. And even Mick Jagger called the Beatles the four-headed monster. But you found working with the Rolling Stones easier than working with the Beatles. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. The Beatles were more insular than the Rolling Stones. The four of them were, the wagons were more closely circled together with the Beatles. Perhaps because originally they came from Liverpool, as you know, the north of England, and it wasn't the great cosmopolitan London, it was Liverpool. Like the Animals came from Newcastle. These were tougher places. So I think when they came down south, the Beatles, again, they huddled together. This was London. This was the Palladium. This is where the Queen of England lived. And these are just these four little guys who couldn't get a record deal. And so it made them, I think, tighter as a group. Then the extraordinary and proper explosion of their music occurred, and they took over the world. And as Ringo said, only the four of us will ever know what that was like. So then when I went to talk to them for the first time before we did Paperback Writer and Rain, giving them an idea, which I think I said in the book, was kind of like putting a piece of meat in the animal's cage, that one of them would pick it up and maybe have a bite and toss it over to the other one who'd sniff it and think, well. And so by the time you got your idea back, it had been mauled and played around with a little bit like that. Not that they didn't go with the idea, but it was, the four of them had a good chew at the piece of meat before you got it back and before anything moved forward. So, but I would say they were more insular for the reasons I've given. That, they weren't famous and rich when they began. They were these four guys who just happened to be incredibly talented. Whereas the Rolling Stones, Mick was going to the London School of Economics. They'd already been playing in clubs in London, in Richmond, in and around London. They were more rhythm and blues. The Beatles were more rock and roll. But also in the same way that Paul, I think, probably became the go-to Beatle in later years, just because he was trying to figure out how to keep them all together. The go-to Rolling Stone for me was Mick. Also because he was very definitely the front man. Whereas with the Beatles, you had the three guitar players and Ringo. And like the Rolling Stones had the four guitar players, the three guitar players, Mick and Charlie. And so the one that I always would give the idea to, I call up Mick and say, here's what I'm thinking for Paint It Black, that you put your hands up after every verse, we take out a bank of lights in the studio, so eventually it's you standing in a black space, paint it black. Where with the Beatles, it was more like you'd have to obviously include, but you included all the Stones too. We had meetings with all of them, and they all had their say, of course, but it was Mick was more the one carrying the ball, because he was the one who was going to be performing it more than Bill or Brian or Keith was. So I just found them an easier ride than the Beatles. And also, as Mick said, the Beatles were the four-headed monster. They're the most famous people in the world.
Now, Michael, I need to ask you, in the future, as you know, Beatle historians and everyone's going to look back on your fabulous, fantastic career. Now, I just want to ask you, as a Beatle fan myself, working with the Beatles, what was the biggest highlight for you? I know it's very hard to pin it down, but was it working on a video? Was it working on the Let It Be film? Was it being with the Beatles? I mean, when historians are going to reflect back on your career, what's the highlight you'd like them to remember?
Yeah, it was. I mean, when I first met them that time at Abbey Road, before we were going to talk about the two videos, I was very nervous. I'd met, and worked with some well-known people at that time, including the Rolling Stones and whoever else, and actors. But they came with them. With them came all that they'd achieved at such a young age. And the reason they were as famous as they were is because of something that they had done. Yes, they caught the wave like a surfer caught the wave, being on the Ed Sullivan Show 3 months after President Kennedy was killed. Yes, that everything seemed to go their way in terms of promotion, in terms of the gigs, etc. And then when you met them, you realized they were really, how God arranged it, that he put the four of them together, is something we'll, have to check on when we go to heaven. They were, there was a cricket player who years ago came on the pitch when England was losing or Australia was losing, and he batted 100, and someone said, "Cometh the hour, cometh the man." Well, the world was ready for the Beatles. So cometh the hour, cometh the man. So I would say, not only did I like them, and after I got over the nerves after a while. Certainly by the time we did Let It Be, but I really, in a way, loved them because of not so much what they'd achieved, but of who they were. They were four extraordinary people, and now we have Paul and Ringo left. I mean, John's murder was a disaster for the world, and George's early death. I mean, who would have thought when we were doing Let It Be in 1969 that within 11 years, well, Brian was already dead. No, Brian was already, John would be dead in 11 years, and George, what, 8, 9, 10 years later, whatever it was. Anyway, so I guess the answer, and still when I see Paul or Ringo, there's something very strange, and I'm not going to say mystical about them. They're just normal guys who, use deodorant and eat their breakfast, but so the answer is, I can't put my finger on it, but it was an extraordinarily fortuitous thing in my life for me to not only meet them, but work with them.
Well, Michael, in regards to that, I do want to tell people your book is fantastic. Luck and Circumstance. It's out of print, but you can get it on Kindle. And I just love that book. And one of the things you said in the book, and this has followed you through your life, talent and beauty always converges. That's the kind of childhood you had. You were witness to talent and beauty at your home, your mom and her very special friends. And then it kind of followed you and included the Beatles, because I think you may have referred to the Beatles as iconic, like comic book characters, you know, uh, you know, Mickey and Donald and Jughead and Archie. And they're the Beatles, talent and beauty converging in one place, as you said, in Liverpool. God knows why. So, and that's kind of followed you your whole life, talent and beauty, and you've been witness to all this. What an extraordinary life you have.
Well, yeah, I was quite ambitious. I was quite ambitious. I didn't know what for. I also knew I was not really suited to making a living in the regular world. My stepfather was a businessman. I didn't know how to do that. I mean, I see, I don't drive. My brain, there are bits of my brain which have somewhere dropped out. Couldn't read till I was 8 or 9. I don't drive. I can't. I can judge like how far you two are away from me. I mean, one of you's in Massachusetts, one of you is in Australia. So I can judge distance, but not when I'm driving. Like if I'm pulling out of a line of cars and a truck is coming down a hill toward me, I will keep going and race that truck until something good or bad happens. But that's why I stopped driving, because that was my instinct. I don't have great instincts. I had no particular gift. And the only thing which happened is my mother was an actress. She said to me when I was 14, I was at home on a school vacation. Do you want to, I don't know, what are you doing today? And she said, do you want to come and watch rehearsal? I'm rehearsing a play downtown, a little play. And so I said, no, I don't know. But I did. I got on the subway and went down. And then that my life changed, because the world of the theater, which can also be maybe the world of movies or theater or rock and roll, is the place I felt like it functioned, because it was like everybody was wanting the same thing. Everybody was working hard to achieve it. There was a sort of community. Yes, there'd be rows and things. I mean, I remember in rehearsals, one of the other actors made my mother start to cry. But that didn't bother me. I figured, the theater is the world of emotion, and she's having a little bit of emotion now. It's good. But in other words, I found myself in that world, and I didn't know what to do if I wasn't in that world, because I had no other skill, I guess. So, but I'm glad you like the book, and
it's great. And I'll just tell people, I'm sure that's your painting behind you.
Oh yeah,
because you are a painter.
Yeah, hold on.
Now, Michael, I want to say, being with the Beatles, out of the 4 of them, did you find the 4 of them were always very helpful with you? Or did you find, because of artistic direction from either 2 of them, either Paul or John, that sometimes you had to come to that, how can I say, level ground with them? Like, who was more demanding, Paul or John? Or basically they weren't?
Well, they were good to work with. They weren't diva-like at all. They weren't like some movie stars or women actresses who give you a hard time. No, they were interested, and I'll tell you something that John said. I think they all contributed. They all chipped in, especially when we were talking about going on the roof. But John taught me something, which may be the answer we're looking for. Before we shot Revolution, which we did before we did Hey Jude, we did them all in one day. I was walking toward the studio down a corridor and then coming from another corridor was John. And so we fell into step together as we were walking toward the studio. And he was looking not his best, like he'd been up all night. His skin was pasty, his hair was lank. And I said, do you want to go to makeup? And he said, what for? And I said, well, maybe they just give you a little color in your cheeks or something like that. And he said, no, I don't. And I said, well, why? And he said, because I'm John Lennon. Now, I first of all thought, does he mean I'm so important that stuff it and let him take me as I am? And then I realized what he meant was, I'm John Lennon. I'm not an actor. I'm not Robert Redford pretending to be John Lennon. I am only John Lennon. And so if this is what I look like today, it's what I look like today. And so he very much made the distinction between him as a star, as a performer, and just a human being. And so they all were just human beings who had their own issues. But that struck me as very interesting, that he let the world see him as he was, as opposed to pretending to be someone he wasn't.
I want to say, Michael, Plastic EP and Chachi Lapret, we thank you so much for your time. And let me tell you, the world loves you. We can't wait for the Peter Jackson's movie. He's making a documentary of your documentary. And you know what? The world's going to look on you, and the sun's going to shine every time you get up of the great work and what you did as a pioneer with film, and what you've done in the Beatles' career is just totally amazes me.
Well, it couldn't come from a better voice than from you, so thank you.
And Plastic, I know we have a minute and a half left. I just want to do a quick thing with you, Michael, because as a child, you loved Little Abner with your doll, and I just thought that was fantastic. And because when I was a boy, I delivered groceries to Al Cap just outside of Harvard Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then years later, we saw Al Cap in a kind of a tough conversation with John and Yoko at the bed-in. But I just wanted to, there's a connection there.
What a link between us, Al Cap, Little Abner, John and Yoko. 70 degrees of separation.
I would deliver groceries. He had a maid in the kitchen, always baking. They had a big, like, wolf dog. And I was a big fan of Al Cap until I saw him really get on John and Yoko's case. But I know, Plastic, we're running out of time.
I'll tell you what, Plastic EP and Chachi Lapret, salute you, Michael.